everyone, and welcome to another episode of Candid, where we have real talks with real people. Today's topic will be immigration and nationalism, and we're going to be speaking a lot about the Immigration, Nationality, and Asylum Bill, which was first proposed to be changed by Immigration Minister under the Menace administration, Ellsworth Johnson, last year. The issue has begun to spike recently, and today we'll be speaking with Jose Etienne. He will be speaking about his experience in Anagua. Jose, do you mind introducing yourself and what you experienced?
Yes, good evening, guys. First of all, thank you for having me. Such an honor. I am a media journalism major at the University of the Bahamas. So I'm also working as an intern broadcast reporter at Eyewitness News. I'm a former youth parliamentarian. And yeah, so just to speak about my experience in Inagua, of course, we've seen record numbers of undocumented migrants heading to the Bahamas, particularly those coming from Haiti. And of course, we know that Inagua is basically the closest island to Haiti. And so while en route, they would have been captured while heading to Haiti, Inagua, sorry. And of course, we would have seen hundreds. I believe the Department of Immigration would have recorded that over 1,000 migrants would have been captured and apprehended, and of course, eventually repatriated. And so we've seen record numbers of that happening. And of course, I would have had the opportunity to fly over in Inagua to provide coverage for the repatriation exercise that government would have executed. And of course, there would have been some concerns, and we understand and accept that the law must and will be executed to its fullest extent. However, my concerns arise when I feel as though there's no humanity in it, right? And so I feel as though that was the missing element in the exercise. But I do understand that the law will be adhered to, it must be adhered to, and it must be enforced and executed. But my concern is just that how do we treat them? How do we treat migrants respectfully and humanely while enforcing the law? And I feel as though that was the missing aspect of it all during the exercise.
Yes, Jose. So before we actually get into the facts of it all, when it comes to the newsworthiness that we normally see throughout the media, I want you to tell us a little about what you saw for yourself. I know a lot of times, we place a photo on stories and then people see it and then they go based on the story. But since you were there and you saw everything, tell us about that experience and exactly what you saw.
Yes, so immediately after landing in Inagua, I would have seen perhaps about 100 or just over 100 of migrants being seated on the ground at the Inagua airport. Of course, they were getting ready to be repatriated that morning. This was like shortly after 7 o'clock in the morning, at just about 8 o'clock actually, when we landed, and I saw migrants basically waiting to be repatriated. And of course, it was a lot of them, but my concern was there was no social distancing. Of course, we're still amidst a global pandemic, and there were concerns that migrants who landed in Inagua, residents of Inagua, echoed concerns that maybe that could cause an increase in COVID cases. But here we see while they're being repatriated or while they're waiting for that exercise to happen, there's no social distancing, basically little to no adherence to the COVID-19 protocols. And so, of course, that stood out to me, considering, again, that we are amidst a pandemic. But I must admit that eventually I would have seen workers coming out distributing masks, etc. And so that was the first site. And then we would have been taken to the other areas and the other shelters, houses where the migrants were being kept. And that was an experience because there were concerns about how much of how, I guess, unsanitary the conditions were. All right. Yes, I mean it's good that they have a place to stay, a place to sleep, or whatever. How comfortable is it? I mean, can't speak to that. Can't say that is the case. How sanitary is it? I can't say that is the case. But the fact is, they have somewhere to stay until they're repatriated. But in going there and seeing the place for myself, of course, it was very questionable. There was a stench. Of course, migrants were on vessels, etc., for days trying to come, and so after being captured and not really being able to exercise, hygiene stuff or whatever. I was that is something that I would have obviously taken note of. That the fact that there was a stench, and most notably the fact that it wasn't as sanitary as I believe, or as I would argue it should be, right? So those are some of the things I've noticed. Of course, because I was able to speak with the migrants due to me, of course, being able to speak their language, I was able to interact with them, and of course, they would have voiced their concerns about uh, their 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 possessions being taken away from them, being seized, their passports. Some saying their monies were taken away from them, others saying their cell phones, etc. Yeah, and so yeah, those were most of the things that I would have been exposed to. You have other persons saying, I interviewed some of the migrants, and some of them saying that they were actually mistreated. Some saying they were abused, they were beaten. All right, some saying that they were not given food or water, and so those are the information and the concerns that migrants had that I would have taken note of, and that I would have observed, and of course felt some type of way about. Mhm.
Okay, so we are still on this humanitarian aspect of immigration, correct?
Right.
I know the human rights Bahamas president, Ms. Stephanie St. Fleur, she spoke about how this incident in Inagua could possibly be, how did she describe it? She said that it would be a human rights crisis, is how she explained it. And you spoke also about the safety, how Inagua residents felt unsafe at the location where the migrants were kept. How would you describe the security that were there enough um, officers? Because we know on Abaco, people complained that there weren't enough officers. So how was that seen on that site?
Well, to respond to that question directly, I feel as though there was an abundance of security, right? There was tightened security on the grounds in Inagua. And as a matter of fact, I would have spoken to, and that was simply on the grounds. That was at the various houses where migrants were being kept. And so if we were to talk about a security on shores, at border, on the borders, on seas, I would have spoken to one of the commanders, or the commander responsible for the southern part of the Bahamas, and he would have assured that security would have been heightened and tightened, um, just to minimize the whole migration exercise. So to respond directly to your question, security was not an issue. Security was not compromised. All right, there was tightened security everywhere. Landing in Inagua, like I would have mentioned earlier, immediately after landing, I saw the migrants being seated on the ground at the airport, and surrounding them were several defense force officers, right, adorned in their uniform. Of course, they had on them their machine, their weapons, etc. Huge weapons at that. I mean, we ain't talking no little handguns or whatever. They had their huge weapons. So in terms of security, I don't think that was an issue. I do not think that was an issue. And of course, like you would have said, some Inagua residents expressed concerns, particularly about a revolt. Now, in my humble view, based on my observations and based on what I've seen in Inagua, I don't think that could have been likely, because based on my observations, again, it appeared that the defense force officers and other law enforcement agencies had the situation under control, and the migrants, all of them, I would actually say, were apprehended, and so there would have been little to no concerns about persons getting through the cracks, escaping, etc. Now, I don't think that would have been the case, because there there was security everywhere, all of the houses, at the airport, etc. So I don't think security was an issue.
I have a few questions to ask you based on what you said. So you were saying that you spoke to a few of them. What was the basic census of what they were saying?
Yeah, so I spoke to several of the migrants, and basically what all of them did was express their concerns about how they were kept and how they were treated while being apprehended, right? And so that causes another controversial issue as to whether migrants or detainees should be able to express themselves, should be able to speak, should be able to voice their concerns or make demands while breaking the law, and while subsequently being apprehended for breaking the law. That is another controversial issue, and that is where we tap into the conversations and discussions, arguments about human rights, etc. Right? But to answer your question directly, most of them were saying, well, we're not liking the way we're treated. We're not liking how they're apprehending us. We don't like the state we're in. I spoke to a lady directly, and she said to me that they've been mistreated. All right, they're not being given proper sanitary conditions. All right, and she would have obviously alluded to the fact that we're in a pandemic, and that just threatens and jeopardizes their health, right? And others saying, well, and of course, I would have been able to capture moments of persons shouting at the officers saying, well, y'all could never do this to us in Haiti. Others saying, when we get back to our country, we're going to report this to our government, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it was a lot of concerns that they had, a lot of frustrations, a lot of grievances about the way they were held. Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. A few of it sounds a little bit entitled. But speaking about your, I'm not sure if this is a bit too in-depth, but speaking a little bit about your Haitian descendants, and what can you say is a reason that this is a continuing issue, that a lot of Haitians migrate to the Bahamas? And it's not just to the Bahamas, a lot of them migrate to the United States, etc. But what do you think is the reason that it continues to happen?
Right, great question. I think it should all be clear to us now as to why we see Haitian nationals leaving their country, abandoning their country basically to go elsewhere. Like you would have mentioned, it's just not the Bahamas. We've seen just before the Bahamas would have started to see record numbers of migrants coming to the Bahamas. We've seen Haitian migrants fleeing to the United States of America. And we see, of course, how the US enforced their rules and enforced their repatriation exercise, right? And of course, it was questionable to many. But the point is, we've seen many Haitians leaving their country to go elsewhere. And I think at this point, we have to take into consideration the occurrences and the events that would have transpired in Haiti several months ago. I mean, it is no secret that Haiti is very challenged economically. Haiti is one of the most poorest countries, perhaps not just in the Caribbean, but arguably, yes, in the world. And so that is certainly a factor. The fact that persons, unemployment is an issue. They can't work, they can't get money to feed their families. And so they're trying to find a better life elsewhere, right? We know that due to the ongoing pandemic, that has also posed a challenge in Haiti where there's a health crisis, right? We see also that the reoccurrence of natural disasters. We've seen recently, if memory doesn't serve correctly, I think August or so. I know this was shortly after the assassination of the president, which is also another factor, but focusing on natural disasters in itself, we see how that would have obviously deteriorated the situation in Haiti, killing some, destroying some of the parts, some of the facilities, etc. Right? That obviously would have compounded the entire situation. And most notably, the president of the Republic of Haiti being assassinated, right? So that speaks to the fact that there is no security in that country. So if there's no security for the actual chief of that country, the actual president, I think that goes to that. It's needless to say that the average citizen has protection or has security. And so we see them fleeing from all of these circumstances, all of these challenges, right? And so when you take all of those occurrences into consideration, we see that persons have legitimate reasons as to why they're fleeing. Now, when we get into the way they're doing, when we get into how they're doing it, is it lawful? Is it right? No. Right? I don't think that's up for discussion. We cannot agree. We cannot agree that the manner in which they're doing it is lawful. It is not. And that is why, as a result, we see that government must enforce the law and even eventually must repatriate them back. But I think what we need to also consider is the humanitarian aspect of why they're leaving. All right. And I think it simply boils down to the fact that they just want to escape all of the challenges that are clearly overwhelming in their country, hoping to get a better life. And I think that is simply what it is.
I definitely agree with you in terms of empathizing and sympathizing with these individuals, right? Because what they're coming from is worse than what we have ever experienced. And I feel like a lot of Bahamians don't take that into consideration. And like you said, it isn't right the way that they're coming here. However, you've mentioned that some of the people said that they were going to report this to their government. And I kind of find that interesting because you're leaving a country, you're coming here and you're being repatriated. How is it fair that you're reporting the Bahamas to your government. So how do you feel about that entire statement? Because I find that kind of interesting, and I don't know if anyone else have any thoughts on that. Because I feel like that's kind of wrong. How are you doing something illegal and then going to report to your government?
Great question. Great question. And these are, I would argue, these are very thought-provoking questions, which of course prompt conversations that need to be had. And so, admittedly, I think some of the things they were saying were a bit irrational, right? You are clearly in the wrong. You are now being tried for breaking the law, for breaching the law, for illegal migration. And so, at this point, I mean, you can't be going back to the government to report them on how on the situation. Now, here's what I think is the I guess I would say the defining point. Perhaps they may be entitled to go back to their government and report on which the manner they were being kept, right? Because you can't go back to the Haitian government and say, hey, we need you to address the situation. We were apprehended in the Bahamas for illegally migrating. Nah, you can't say that. However, I do believe you have the liberty as a citizen of Haiti, you have the liberty to report to your government and express your grievances that we were kept a certain way. We were kept inhumanely while being apprehended in Haiti. That is not a problem. All right. So, but admittedly, some of the things they were saying were irrational, but I do get, I'm empathetic, not sympathetic, but really empathetic in terms of why they were saying some of the things they were saying, because I guess they were speaking from emotionalism. All right, they were perhaps speaking out of desperation, and of course, we see those two factors. We see that is why, they're leaving their country in the first place out of desperation. We just want to get the hell out of this mess. All right, and so here they are now being apprehended, and so they're emotional now. They're emotional, and so it's like, why, we're not being treated fairly. We're going to tell our government on this. All right, because and of course, they probably, because now their rights and their power have been taken from them. That's probably giving them some sense of power that while we feel as though, while you're trying to make us feel as though we have no government, we have no government agency to represent us, etc. We actually do, and once we get back in our country, we're gonna report that. And so perhaps that is why they were saying some of the things they were saying. But again, admittedly, some of which they were saying were a bit irrational.
Okay, so speaking to what you were saying about the way they are kept and how a lot of people in Anagua are afraid of them escaping. We actually had this conversation in a class I had recently about immigration and the way that we can fix the ways that we deal with it. I'm not even speaking about the laws and Haitian immigrants who are born here and live most of their life here. That's a whole nother topic. But speaking about just the way that the ones who are repatriated back are kept, we were throwing around the idea that maybe there should be, I believe this is in another country that they do this, where they have a boat and they have food and water on the boat. And instead of holding them here, because there are a certain laws, well, Shanae, I know, knows a little bit more about it, that the detention center has like a loophole situation where it's not technically lawful to hold them. There's no law that says that they can be held. So we were talking about having a boat that takes them back immediately, but then also that would be using resources as well. But what are your thoughts on different ways of avoiding holding them in the Bahamas to avoid that situation?
I think it ultimately boils down to an expedited repatriation exercise, right? Now, the reason why they won't be repatriated as soon as possible or as quick as possible is because under the previous minister-led administration, and of course, initially at the time, former member of Parliament for St. Anne's, Brent Simonet, he was the Minister of Immigration at the time. And in 2019, if memory serves correctly, he would have issued this law that if migrants are being caught illegally migrating here to the Bahamas, they will then be detained or arrested, apprehended, whatever you want to say, and then they will be tried before the courts to be proven guilty for illegal migration, and then they will be sent back to their country. All right. I feel as though that plays a significant role in prolonging the process. and causing them to be housed here for so long for you know an unexpectedly long period of time. And that is something this current government has advocated for advocated for in terms of expediting the repatriation exercise, where we don't take them before the courts. We capture them and we send them right back home. And so I feel as though that is one of the most effective ways we could just minimize this whole crisis, where we just after capturing them, we do whatever needs to be done, and we communicate with the government of their country. We let them know, expect your nationals. We're sending them back. We've caught them illegally migrating, so we've captured them, we've housed them until further notice, but we are going to be sending them by X amount of time. So I feel as though that would automatically, clamp down on this whole prolonging issue.
Yeah, I agree with you. Because people are held in a detention center for months, and you have to clothe these people, you have to feed them, you have to give them water, you have to ensure that the facilities are working. You have to pay people, you have to pay defense force officers and immigration officers to man these facilities. And it's just a big cash cow, if you ask me. And
Right.
I honestly think that if we could get the money to invest in a boat where we could immediately send them back, or maybe hold them for a couple of days and then send them back, it will be easier on the country. But then another issue is border control. We don't have enough of it, and it feels almost impossible to man all of the waters that we have, because we have 700 islands and keys, and we have water in between. So it's extremely difficult seeing that the small amount of manpower that we have in the country. So you have any thoughts on that, or any suggestions of maybe what we could possibly do to help with these stuff?
Yes, and in speaking with some of the representatives from these law enforcement agencies, they would have communicated that they are putting more manpower on the grounds to provide border patrol, sorry, and to ensure that the shores of the Bahamas are protected, to minimize this whole migration exercise. And of course, we see them merging forces with the U.S. Coastal Guard, these other international law enforcement agencies, to tackle these issues. And so I feel as though that is one of the most effective ways to challenge that. All right, spreading more manpower on the grounds everywhere. In northern parts, in the southern parts, central, etc. We see not too long ago, more in the central areas, like Ragged Island, Exuma. We saw migrants being captured there, and so we see now how them dispatching more individuals on the waters. We see how effective that has been, because now they're not just capturing successfully migrants in the southern shores, they're now doing so successfully elsewhere. And so I believe spreading the men in the waters is definitely an effective tool.
All right, Jose. So the thing that I find interesting about this whole situation is that when you look at the larger economic scale of things, right? The Bahamas is regarded as a third world country, and Haiti is regarded as a third world country. Yet over the past week, since we've seen over 1,000 Haitians make that perilous journey to come here, how do you think the information, or do you have any insight on how the information gets to them in Haiti, that it's possible for them to seek a better life in the Bahamas, regardless of how they come here?
Great question. Of course, presumably, right? Presumably, those en route here have family members over here. They communicate often. I mean, everything is just a text away. Everything is just we live in a social media age where, communication is basically so easy, right? And so that I'm assuming, right, hypothetically speaking, they're probably able to communicate with their relatives over here, getting information on how their relative was probably able to get a better life over here. Of course, obtaining legal status to work and to sustain themselves and their family. And so perhaps they get the impression that if they take the risk, if they take that perilous journey, like you would have mentioned, Dudley, if they were to take that risk and come over here, by the time they get over here and they get settled, then perhaps they will be able to better their lives. All right. And so sometimes it is definitely misleading, because and I think it is apparent that these Haitians think the Bahamas is this super great country that just is so miraculous that would make their lives automatically better once touching ground here. And that is certainly not the case. That is certainly not the case. But it appears that is the impression that they have, and that is why they take the risk to leave their country and come here, because they probably feel as though if I come here, then my life will certainly be better. And I certainly understand that, because now you see them operating out of desperation, because this country may not automatically be a lifesaver for them immediately. But then again, that's what they're thinking now, because their country is completely in disarray. Their country to them is completely dysfunctional, abnormal, not good. And so for them, they just got to get the hell out of Haiti and get elsewhere. And if the Bahamas is their first stop, then it's going to be their first stop. So to answer your question directly, in some instances, it's them probably thinking the Bahamas is better. In other instances, they just want to get out of Haiti.
Maybe they're feeling that because you were talking about the assassination of the president in Haiti, maybe they're feeling that they have a little bit more freedom in the Bahamas because we are a democracy, apparently. And I feel that's probably why they feel they should come here. Shanae?
Oh, I was going to say, Jose touched on this being their first stop. A lot of Haitians use the Bahamas as a passing ground for them to also get to the United States of America, because
Right.
they have the largest Haitian immigrant population in this side of the world. I believe it's over 1 million migrants. So for a lot of them, the Bahamas is just a passing ground. They just need to get here in order to find a way to America. So people also should consider that as well.
Right. And that is true, Sinead, to solidify that point, because I've been speaking with several Haitian nationals over here, of course, those who are legal. And in conversations with them, I see them admitting that they want to go to the United States of America. Right. Yes, they were able to come here. Yes, their lives were able to improve as a result of being here and being able to gain employment, etc. But they still express concerns that things are still challenging for them over here. And so you see them using this country as just a journey point, a passing point to get to the United States, where they probably spend the rest of their days.
Okay, Jose. So, of course, we know, at least many know, that the Immigration Act has not been revised in almost 60 years. And so the F&M government, they decided to make a few reforms that, it wasn't really enforced because of Parliament's dissolvement early in, I think that would have been September. Well, early this year, because of the election period. Now, I know in a recent interview, Dr. Minnis had said that the F&M government decided to, the PLP government decided to follow through with a lot of their party's initiatives. And I think one would have been the law reform. How do you think he should have responded? Because many would think a person with his position would not care who it is pushing forward their agendas, but actually seeing the country develop and seeing the benefits of their plans flourish. So what would you think? Why do you think he would make a statement like that?
I think it's this big elephant in the room where we've all been advocating for law reform, right? But we've seen persons in the legal sector admonish for argue for that. We've seen other residents and those impacted argue for that. But we've seen what some persons may argue to be little interest or little heed or attention to do so. So perhaps that would have caused them to answer in such a way or treat it in such a way. But again, I certainly do believe that we desperately need law reform in those aspects. And I would have alluded to another aspect that we need law reform for, but I think I would say that for later. Because I think in this particular discussion, we're actually focusing in on the whole migration exercise. But I do think we do need law reform for immigration laws. And we also see that recently under the Minnis administration, we saw government actually revising and working on this immigration bill, right? But we see that yet to be developed, yet to be published, yet to be finished. So there are some concerns, and there are some concerns also as to whether this new government will carry on with that and will publish that. But certainly, and arguably, we do need some law reform in those aspects.
Okay, I think all of us could agree that the court intervention is something that we could let go. One of the things that the FNM government implemented. I know that there's a pattern. Of course, we know there's a pattern with illegal Haitians coming into the country, but when they get here, that asylum aspect of the law. I know in December of 2020, there was some allegations made of the detainees being drugged and raped by male officers, and in instances like that. And you just said that, according to the immigrants in Agua currently, they also face some sort of discrimination, abuse of power by officers, allegedly. Would you agree that maybe the asylum law, like we said, we should just send them back? What's another way? A lot of people, they're really coming here to, run away from, poverty and make a better life for themselves. When it comes to the asylum law, how would you better go about it?
Right. And admittedly, I don't even have a better or full understanding of what asylum is. But I do know, I have this general overview that it is something that migrants would want, that it is something that migrants feel as though they deserve and would probably benefit from. And that would probably be their savior in this whole migration issue, right? But obviously, we see the Bahamas having yet to move in that direction, where these migrants could actually have access to asylum. And so, right? And so we see the previous Minister administration, we see them working on, we see how they were working on the immigration bill that also dealt with the whole asylum issue. But of course, as I would have stated, that bill has yet to be completed, that has yet to be published, agreed upon, discussed in Parliament, etc. But of course, now with Parliament now resuming and with a new party governing this country, we hope to see how that is integrated into the bill and how that is discussed and possibly implemented so that migrants could have a way out.
Okay, speaking to what you were saying about the asylum thing, to basically put it in layman's terms or in its simplest form, asylum is basically giving someone from another country rest or just a place to stay while they're escaping some issue in their country. And we know that Haiti has a lot of issues, especially when it comes to their government. So a person from Haiti would come to the Bahamas and speak to our government basically and say, hey, I'm seeking asylum because my president was assassinated or something of that. And that's something that we actually do when I've actually heard of Bahamians going to Canada or the United States and saying that LGBTQ plus people, they'd say that we're seeking asylum in your country because we are being beaten or discriminated against for our
Okay.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We already have a very big issue when it comes to immigration, so it's difficult to give them asylum, and we already have that problem now. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Thank you for that explanation, because now I think I basically understand it clearly now. And again, if we're going to consider reasons as to why then persons should be granted asylum, I mean, I guess we could expound on this, right? But I think those are some legitimate reasons. Your president was just killed. Again,
yeah, but the first way, it's you should come into the country legally. That's definitely something someone would say from the back.
Right. Okay. So question: should asylum then be granted to persons regardless of how they came, or will it or must it be granted to persons who would have entered the country legally?
But to answer your question, your specific question about asylum, the Bahamas has an issue with homelessness right now for Bahamians. Right. So I don't think that we're capable of providing asylum to people who come here legally or illegally, because as we can see, we're incapable of housing our own right now. Right. So being asked to house other people, some of whom are forcing their way here, it's unfair to us to be asked to make space for them it's unfair for us to be asked to make space for them when we're currently unable to make space for ourselves. So if asylum is where we're going to end up, and it's something we're going to grant, it should only be for those who come through the proper channels, because, you know, Bahamians have it rough too in the Bahamas.
You know, I definitely agree. And that is something I definitely need clarity on, as to how asylum will be given or facilitated. Because while being empathetic, even sympathetic in terms of giving persons an opportunity or a safe place in your country, the goal is to also crack down on illegal migration. So if these individuals know that you're giving to the asylum in a Christmas box with a bow, even while they came here legally, they're going to spread that word. Hey, you could come here. Just take the risk, whether you come by boat or vessel. Just take the risk and come. Once you get here, you'll get asylum. They're not interested as to whether you came here legally or illegally. Just get here, and they're going to give you. Just state your reasons, and you. If that is the case, then you will see this whole illegal migration issue just exacerbate, where we see migrants coming here in record numbers. We have yet to see, and that'll create a whole another issue, and that'll obviously and inevitably put a strain on the public purse. All right, that's going to consume all resources that I understand that I accept should be designated and set aside for the citizens of the country. So now government will have to now bear that challenge to occupy these seekers and asylum occupants, and that's going to be an issue. All right, so I definitely have to regulate the way you go about facilitating. I agree.
And I definitely see that the asylum thing would cause issues when it comes to citizenship for Bahamian-born Haitians, and people deciding to come here and have children so that they can find a way to stay. And that's not just an issue in the Bahamas, that's an issue everywhere. Shanae, I know you know a lot about those laws. Do you want to talk about those?
Yes. I talk about the general laws of immigration, right?
About the issues of getting citizenship as a Bahamian-born.
Yes. Okay. So our law states that if you were born to non-Bahamian parents in the country, that you're eligible for citizenship at age 18. However, you are only allowed a window of 1 year to apply. And this has caused a lot of issues for a lot of people. One, simply because not knowing, or not even being aware that they needed to go through this process. A second issue is that a lot of some Bahamians, I should say, have issues with these individuals, and the system itself is very inefficient. I've interviewed a few people who have had issues with applying for citizenship and their documents being lost 3, 4, 5 times, putting the process back 5, 6, 7 years. Now imagine coming out of school being 18. It's now been 5 years, you have not gotten your citizenship, you cannot work in the country legally, you cannot get a driver's license, a bank account. So you're sitting in limbo for years and years and years. And it doesn't make sense because it's a simple yes or no. There's no reason to drag out the process. I think the processing time is about, I think it says a year to 2 years, I believe. But so why is it now taking 5, 10, 15? Some people are here and they're 40 and still don't know their status. You know what I'm saying? They put in the papers, and that system doesn't make sense. And I feel like if they already been here 18 years, 20, 25 years, come on, they're entitled to put in for the citizenship. So you either tell them yes or you tell them no. It's not that hard to do. I don't understand why we draw that process. I don't know what you guys' thoughts are about that.
I mean, just to keep the conversation going, I'll interject right here. I agree. My sentiments are the same. My sentiments are exactly the same, and that causes me to argue that there needs to be law reform, right? And I understand how things are in the Bahamas. I understand what dictates your nationality in the Bahamas. It's not place of birth. Place of birth really has nothing to do with your nationality, or to be specific, place of birth or being born in the Bahamas has nothing to do with whether you're Haitian, whether you become a citizen of this country. You become a Bahamian based on your father, based on parentage, right? Based on your father being a Bahamian. That is what automatically makes you a Bahamian.
Is it father or is it mother? I believe there was an issue with that. I believe it's your mother.
No, it's
mother.
Initially, wasn't it father though?
No, it's father. If your
Right.
if your mommy, if your Bahamian mother has a child for a foreigner, you are not a Bahamian.
But I also
according
saw
to the
that
law.
if you're
but if
That
Bahamian,
is what they're trying to amend right now.
But
I also
also,
saw
if
that
you're
if your
Bah-
Bahamian father has a child with a foreigner, then you cannot get
if they're
citizenship
not
as well.
married, you cannot get citizenship either.
Wow. It's very confusing, the different.
It's very confusing and very complicated, but we see in less complicating situations. Than once your father's a Bahamian, you will automatically be a Bahamian, right? And so, uh, and that causes concerns as to, me being born in the Bahamas, or a child being born in the Bahamas to foreign parents. I mean, shouldn't that be enough to make me a Bahamian citizen? The fact that I was born in the Bahamas just like the other kid, So those are concerns. But the law is set up the way it is. It's designed the way it is, of course. I mean, persons are lamenting for law reform in that aspect. But in terms of the entire process, it is certainly a process that is not as facilitating as it should be. I don't think it should take a whole long, extended period of time for you to say, like you said, Sinead, yay or nay. I think it boils down to just yay or nay. Yeah, so yes, basically saying, like, if you guys would critically read the Constitution to understand it, right, you'll see how it says that it's basically saying that persons in that category are eligible to eventually become Bahamian citizens. All you have to do is apply, follow the steps, take note of the prerequisites, the requirements, etc., fulfill them, and you'll be eligible to become a Bahamian citizen, right? So why then should it take so long for me to, or for that person, or for a candidate to be ratified, be naturalized, be approved for Bahamian citizenship if they would have followed the procedure? I don't think it should be taken that long. And so here we see some flaws in the system, right? And of course, persons have vehemently opposed the process in itself. Persons have vehemently and emphatically made it clear that this process should not exist. Automatically give citizenship at birth, right? That is a whole another discussion for another time, right? Let's just focus on the process in itself. If they want to keep that, fine. But in keeping it, let's just make it more feasible. Let's make it more effective. So let's make it less stressful, less strenuous, right? And it's not as facilitating. Persons shouldn't have to be taking years to say yeah on it, to get to approve or not. All right. And you see governments come in and out, and individuals, candidates have yet to be ratified, have yet to be approved. And to me, that is absolutely nonsensical. That should not be. And like you would have mentioned, Sinead, as a result, these persons' lives are now in limbo because they cannot function and be productive members of our society because they can't work. They're not being accepted on certain jobs, whether they're qualified for it or not. They can't because they don't have that blue book. So what are they to do? All right, you have a lot of persons graduating high school, with salutatorians, valedictorians, etc. They're graduating with high flying GPAs, record accomplishments, etc. They're automatically bound for scholarships, but they can't take advantage of these opportunities simply because they don't have a book. And okay, fine. The average kid graduates high school at 17. They have to wait another year to apply. And after that year of applying, they're not sure as to when they will get that blue book. And so their lives are at a standstill. That should not be the case. I don't think that is there's no dignity in that process, and that should not be the case. And that needs to be challenged. That needs to be improved.
Definitely agree. So I pulled up the laws for automatic citizenship. So this is according to the Bahamas immigration website. And it says that automatic Bahamian citizenship is given to persons who are born in the Bahamas to married parents, with either parent being a Bahamian citizen. If you were born to an unmarried Bahamian female in or outside of the Bahamas, you get automatic citizenship. If you were born outside of the Bahamas to a married Bahamian male who was not born outside of the Bahamas, or if you were adopted by a married Bahamian female, adopted by a single Bahamian female. And we can definitely see the disparity in these laws because whereas Bahamian women can pass it on whether they are married or not, which is very interesting.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were saying that before, and it's just crazy that we're all a bit confused about it. It shouldn't be that way. I feel that, and it's crazy because it's always like well, no, as a female, you notice that there's always like a discrepancy with you not being able to pass on a lot to your children. But it's crazy that the problem now is the male's perspective, which I've never seen. And I don't know why that was that like created that way. I think that's interesting.
I think what this says to me is that in our educational system, we need to embrace our laws and we need to actually, teach our children, our generation, their values, their rights. A lot of times we get out of school and then we just start to learn about the Constitution, and I think basic constitutional rights should be taught in our schools. Point
I
blank.
agree.
Right, and we see little to that happening. Now, I saw a post the other day where someone was basically lamenting for that to be taught in our schools. I mean, constitutional understanding, etc. And a lawyer replied, arguing that while that would be good, she argues that the Constitution and everything about the Constitution, it could eventually get complex, could get difficult to understand, and so it's wise then for them to teach it at tertiary level rather than doing so below tertiary level, because they may not be able to comprehend it as effectively at those levels.
I
I don't
And
know.
understand.
admittedly, the Constitution does get complicated. We see actual lawyers discussing the nuances of Constitution and how the interpretations of it and how the interpretations vary. And so it is certainly undeniably complicated. And so I think that is a valid point.
I understand, but I feel like there should be simple aspects that they choose that they teach, like when it comes to housing or when it comes to immigration or when it, like, they can choose which parts of it are important for someone who does not choose to go into tertiary education, because not everyone chooses that. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Mhm. I
That's
agree.
true, because even the economical aspect of it, Anish just mentioned the housing aspect of our laws. We have those BGCSEs, certain BGCSE align with certain laws. So that would be a great way to kind of infuse the two, because at that point, we have students, we have Bahamians who can actually understand and make sense of those particular laws of the Constitution that would actually benefit them. We complain so much about educating our kids, our next generation, but when they get out of school, they hardly could use the information that was given to them. But stuff like this could actually aid them, even when it comes to policing. That's something that they used to teach what a police can and can't do to you, and a lot of people don't even know the the um the power that a police actually has,
Right.
and so when I say introduce some of the Constitution to our kids, I mean those laws. A police can't just pull you over for no reason. You should have the right to ask the officer, what am I being pulled over for? They don't have the right to just go into your car. Like, these are things people need to know.
Right. I agree.
I think it's a very interesting discussion about the law because for as long as I could remember, I guess it's just because I'm a nerd who used to go in bookstores and buy books. But there's always been available for people. It's like a handbook version of the Constitution. It's the Constitution that you can carry in your pocket and you can read it whenever you want to. So the Constitution is really always available, but it is a very complex thing to talk about, especially when we talk about nuances of immigration. And as we continue this conversation, I want to ask everyone: does everybody know or has heard of the wet foot, dry foot policy in America?
Yes.
I haven't.
Yes.
All right. So the wet foot, dry foot policy is basically in America for the Cuban nationals, if they make it to America and they manage to land on the American shores and stay for a certain period of time, then they're given American citizenship. Do you guys think that it is time for the Bahamas to, integrate something similar to the wet foot, dry foot policy into our immigration laws, and why so?
I don't necessarily agree with that. Simply because it's difficult, like I said earlier, it's difficult to police our waters. So how in the world are we gonna protect all of the square footage of water and land that we have? It's virtually impossible. And I feel that would only put a further strain on the Defense Force, the Marines, and I don't think that that should be a thing in the country. However, I do believe that the laws should be made, should be amended, and the system should be more efficient. Because if they could land, how many illegal immigrants land on a yearly basis? Even if they don't stay, it's still aiding to America's illegal immigration problem. You know what I'm saying? So I don't necessarily feel like that should be something that we look at right now. If we could ever get to the point where we have hundreds of officers who are able to man our waters, then maybe that could be something that we consider. But as of the state of the country is in right now, I do not think that that is something we should look into at this current juncture.
Okay, so I can definitely agree with Shanae's viewpoint on that, because as she said, it would be a very hard thing for our forces to accomplish. And when you look at it, if people come to our shores, they they know, I feel like they know the way to get here, obviously, and they have people working with them to accept them and integrate them into society. Eventually that would be a burden on our economy, because already we have so many people depending on NIB to sustain their living, and even now they don't get a lot. We have those people in Abaco still suffering. So right now our economy as a whole is basically in a state where we can't really make laws to accept people, especially on that caliber, because we already have almost 1,000 of them coming in, just in 2 weeks, if that. So it wouldn't be a smart move on our government to implement. However, just like Shanae said, we could make amends to our laws to kind of build a bridge between the relationship between Haitians and Bahamians, and see how we could better the relationship and kind of combat this whole immigrate. I feel like if you come here, if you come to the Bahamas legally, I accept you, because you look at my laws, you see the value that we hold here, and you take in account that, hey, these people have laws and I have to abide by them. When you come here illegally is when I have my issue, because right off the bat, you don't care about the laws that our forefathers placed here for us to to kind of protect us as a country. So illegally, I'd have to, and then we go back into the asylum situation, and no one really has a good handle on that. So I would have to say, come here legally or don't come here at all.
Normally I like to play devil's advocate, but I can't necessarily play devil's advocate in this situation because it is quite black and white. We need to work on our resources and helping with managing our borders, because we cannot handle it ourselves. Like we obviously get help from the US and the British navies, and I think that once we are able to manage ourselves completely, then we can worry about such laws. And there's so many islands. Like we're an archipelago. It's not like we're a one landmass like the United States. We're just a bunch of different islands, and it's very difficult. And there's a lot of lack of resources on family islands, and that's a whole nother topic that we could talk about. But I think that we have to work on our resources first before we can even think about looking at the laws and think about adding to those laws. We can reform laws, but adding laws, I don't think is something that we can worry about. Jose?
Right. And just to respond to Bethany, sorry. Yeah, and of course you're entitled to say that. I mean, everyone wants their laws to be adhered to. Everyone wants their laws to be taken seriously and to not be disregarded, right? and that's fine. And of course, that's why we have law enforcement agencies to ensure that the law is enforced. Okay, but and I don't want to be the devil's advocate, right? But then again, so that causes me to question whether there is humanity in the whole situation, right? Because again, we know why they're migrating here illegally or whatever. They're taking risks. We know why that's happening. All right, now, do we support, personally, because I'm the one speaking, so do I support it? I don't support the whole illegal immigration, illegal migrating thing or whatever. I don't support that. But then again, I'm empathetic as to why it's happening. So I'm still gonna look at them like humans, right? And I feel as though that is a concern that I have with a lot of persons. The fact that they are solely obsessed with how they're coming into the point where, because they come here illegally, then they can't stand them. They look at them as creatures, as they don't look at them as humans. They feel as though they don't deserve respect. They don't deserve to be handled or treated humanely, whatever. And I don't think that should be the case. And that is my concern, because here we see the law being enforced. But my concern is, while we enforce the law, should that automatically eradicate the whole humanitarian aspect of it? Because there are also, while there are immigration laws that must be enforced, border patrol laws that must be enforced, we also know that there are human laws, global human laws that must also be adhered to. So my concern is, while we enforce border patrol and all that good stuff, right? Do we also enforce the whole human laws in the process? And so that is something that I'm definitely concerned about.
All right. So I personally do not think that that's a wise idea for us. I'm sure we can all come to the same conclusion that, with the state the Bahamas is in right now, it's not possible for us to reasonably house them. So we shouldn't look in that direction. We should look for some solution that a lawyer smarter than all of us can figure out with how to handle this issue, because this is a very nuanced problem.
Yes, so thank you, Jose, for your very insightful comments on the topic and for sharing your experience in Anagua. We really appreciate it.
Certainly, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Well, that was our episode on immigration in the Bahamas for Candid. Keep it real, Bahamas.